Hello everybody and welcome back to another video. Today we are going to take a look at everything that happened in week 3 of the 2023 season of the Overwatch League. Let's start by throwing up my picks from last week and taking a look at how I did overall. As you can see, 12-3 record overall, 2-0 on the big picks, 38-8 record on the season. So, all in all, a pretty good week. The Seoul Infernal were the big kind of shocker in terms of the results on my end, but let's go in and let's talk about the first headline, which this week is all about the Atlanta Reign winning that first big matchup against the Houston Outlaws for the season. The Atlanta Reign did lose their first map of the season, but also the Houston Outlaws lost their first series of the season. And the Atlanta Reign now sit atop the Western region. The only undefeated team left in the Overwatch League. Spoilers, they're the only team left with a perfect record, 6-0, plus 17 map differential, that one map lost. They still look really good. Lip still playing phenomenally. Chew and Fielder still playing phenomenally. All around, this Reign roster still looks very good. I've talked about it a lot so far, so you know there's not much more to say now. But I think getting this win over the Houston Outlaws was definitely the big win they needed. I think there were still a lot of people who were saying Houston's there, Houston's as good, Houston's still very good. Like, I'm not ready to buy in fully to the Reign now. And I think this is kind of the one where it's like, yeah, no, it's very much Atlanta Reign as the top team in this region. There's no real question at this point in time. The meta isn't going to be changing as we go into the midseason madness. So I would say right now this Reign team looks to not only be the best team in the Western region, they look like the best team in the league in general. It seems honestly kind of unlikely they will lose any games between now and the actual midseason madness. I don't think they have any really tough opponents left in their schedule. They might have Boston on the schedule in a couple of weeks. But generally speaking, this team is in a very good spot. It's very unlikely they will be kind of toppled by anybody left in this region. I'm of the opinion that if Houston couldn't do it, I don't really think anybody can do it. I think Houston really is the second best team in this region. And the Reign beat them pretty convincingly. So they will be playing Boston here in a couple of weeks. The last weekend of May. But that's really the only other team left that could maybe do anything to make me question or could really do anything to potentially knock down the Reign. Their only other game that they play is against the Vegas Eternal. They're going to win that one. So really there is a very high chance that this Reign team is undefeated when we go into the midseason madness. And if they're the top team in the West, that also means they automatically guarantee a spot without having to play through any of the knockouts or anything like that. So this is a Reign team that I feel very good about. Very real possibility that come May 28th, they're on a plane to Korea. And they're already getting ready to kind of go and send their team out. Because they just look to be in a very good spot right now. And I just think no one really looks like they can catch them right now. One team that a lot of people would have thought could have caught this team at some point in the season is the San Francisco Shock. And oh boy, what a week it was for the Shock. I talked about this last weekend with the Toronto Defiant and the New York Excelsior, where you had two teams who were kind of on opposite trajectories, despite the fact that New York lost to Toronto in a 3-2 series. I felt like New York walked out of the week with a better just vibe around them. And ironically enough, New York, San Francisco did play. It was the final match of the weekend. When I'm recording this, it just ended like less than an hour ago. And that was not a good game for the Shock. They won. They reverse swept. They needed that win. There's a very real possibility that was a 3-0 for New York. It really was just kind of some luck and some mistakes by Kellen and late in the map on Havana that really kind of ended up turning the series in their favor for the Shock, and then just kind of steamrolling and kind of using that momentum and building upon it and just kind of getting that spark lit under them that they needed. But they lost to the Washington Justice on Saturday, and it was bad. It was a very bad look. They were 3-0'd. The team just is not in a great spot. And I think, even when you look at the fact that they struggled as much as they did against New York, who, no offense and no dig at New York, right? I picked that game to be a 3-2 in favor of the Shock, and it was. I honestly feel like that was kind of a wild out there pick. Like, there was no reason that game should have been a 3-2. There was no reason I should have predicted a 3-2 going into the week, and it was a 3-2, and it was almost a loss for the Shock. So I think there is a lot to really take away. We know the Shock are not in the best position in terms of, like, housing, in terms of kind of where their practice area is. They're, like, living and practicing in a hotel, which is awful, right? Like, that is not what this team's position should be. This is a team with a lot of good players, but even that, to me, is just not... It's not the thing. To me, that is not an excuse to a certain extent, right? Does it impact their performance? Absolutely. I'm not going to sit here and act like them basically living out of a hotel and practicing out of a hotel and doing everything without being where they want to be as a team. I'm not going to sit here and act like there's nothing wrong with that, there's nothing bad about that, or that's not inherently, like, impacting their performance. But I feel like when you look at the way they play, this is a team that just seems like they did not spend time in the offseason learning to kind of play together and be coordinated and learn how to, like, say what you will, they may not have been together all offseason. But this is a team where a lot of these players have played together in the past. They talk about not having synergy, but Max and Junbin and Heesang were on a team together last year. And Proper played alongside Max, right? And he played alongside Finn last year, and he played alongside Vindime in 2021. So to me, there's a lot of underlying issues with this team that they just do not look good. And I tweeted about it the other day that I don't think that this is a thing that just coaching can fix. I think they need to make some changes to this roster. I think they need to make some firm decisions. Number one, I think they need to just stick to one tank player. I think you need to find, between Max and Junbin, which tank you think gives you the best chance of winning in the majority of metas and on most of the tank heroes. They have switched between them. They have had maps where Max is playing Winston, and Junbin is the one who you would expect to be playing Winston. He is a main tank player, and they switch between them. So to me, this is a team where I look at what they do and I say, you need to just pick one of the tanks, whichever one you think is playing better and gives you the better chance of winning, and just play around that player as much as you can. If that player is Max, for example, that doesn't mean Junbin never plays, but you find the places where Junbin can excel the most, and the metas where he can excel the most. Maybe that's a Wrecking Ball meta, and that's when you put Junbin in. Or if you think Junbin is the guy that kind of excels and plays the best, then maybe the meta that you play Max is something like, Zarya or Junker Queen, whatever you want to kind of throw out there as potential. But to me, they have to solidify that tank line. They cannot keep switching between them like this. To me, that is the thing that is going to hurt this team, because they look like they don't have strong coordination, and that doesn't help when you're switching players out like that. The other thing this team, I think, has an issue with is I don't think Proper and Heesang are a duo that are working as well as you want them to, because they're switching between roles. Like, some maps, Heesang is the flex DPS, and Proper is playing hit scan. And then on some maps, Proper's on Tracer and Heesang's on, like, Sombra, and then sometimes it's the other way. There's a lot of just weird kind of things where they switch between maps and whatnot. And we saw this last year in the playoffs with the LA Gladiators, where they looked bad in the playoffs when they played against London Spitfire, because they had Kevster on Sojourn and Happy on Reaper for one map, and then the next map they had Happy on Sojourn and Kevster on Reaper, and then they did the next. It was just they kept switching back and forth, and it doesn't work. You have to have a solidified, solid identity for your damage duo. You look across the league, there's a lot of teams that have just 2 damage players. I personally think you shouldn't have just 2. But you look around the league, you have teams like the Charge, where they only have 2, and they know they're not great at Sombra, so they don't try to force it, right? They just play Hanzo, because they know they can play that at a higher level. Maybe the Shock should just realize we need to find a comp that we can keep Proper on his best hero, we can put Heesang on one of his best heroes, we can put Max or Jumpin on their best hero, and we just play to our strengths. Stop trying to be meta, because they're just not making it work. I think they should add another damage dealer, if I'm being honest with you. I think they need a hit scan player. Proper's good on hit scan, but the problem is, if he's on hit scan all the time, you're hurting your team, in my opinion. because you can't play double hit scan on this team, because outside of Sojourn, Heesang just does not have hit scan. And you don't really have a lot going for you if you have to put Proper on hit scan, because you're forcing Proper to go into the fill position, which is why I don't think you need Proper. I think Proper's role on this team, the best way to get value out of Proper, is to have Proper be able to play the most high impact hero, which is Tracer or Genji or whatever it is in the meta. But right now, it seems like because of the lack of flexibility out of Heesang, they have to make Heesang play whatever is comfortable for him, and then that makes Proper have to be the one that's switching in between a lot of stuff. I don't think it works as well, so I think they need another hit scan player on this roster. I think the fact that they beat New York is, generally speaking, a move in the right direction. I think it was a bad match for them, and I think that they should not be very proud of that result. But I think that they really need to just loosen up. They need to just play to their strengths more, and I think that's what they really need. But like I said, they have other things they need to work on too. I don't think this team is in a very good spot. I really don't think this team has any chance at making it to the knockouts if they keep playing the way they're playing. I don't think they go to Korea the way they're playing right now. And so I think it's a struggle to kind of watch this team. But I'm curious to see what happens. I don't think it's super doomer yet. They're 2-2. They're not completely out of it. But they have some tough matches coming up, and they have to really be able to kind of pull their weight. Otherwise, they very much could be falling behind and might miss out on making it to the Mid-Season Madness in South Korea. Let's move on to a potentially more positive story. A team I don't think I've talked about yet in one of these videos. We have the Los Angeles Valiant. Despite the fact that they are still winless in the league and they have not won a match yet, this past weekend from them was pretty promising. You kind of go back a bit to their match 2 weeks ago, or I guess not 2 weeks ago, last week, when they played against New York. They won that first map, and then the rest of the series was kind of a pretty one-sided affair, but they're starting to show signs of promise. This weekend, very close series against the Mayhem. Could have gone the way of the Valiant. They did get 3-0'd by the Atlanta Reign, but it was not the most one-sided 3-0 we've seen all season. So I think the Valiant are in an interesting spot, and I think if you look at who they have coming up in some of their next matches, they play Toronto Defiant next week. That's a very winnable game for them. I think they play the Shock next week. If the Shock continue to look the way they've looked recently, that could be a winnable game for the Valiant there as well. So I think that the Valiant, despite the fact that they are struggling a bit, they look pretty good. I think they're looking much better. And I think there's no reason to look at the Valiant and say this is the worst team in the league. Because I really don't think they are the worst team in the Western region. I don't think they're the worst team in the league. I think Seeker is such a phenomenal player who provides so much impact on this team. And I think they just kind of know what they are. I think they've done a good job kind of identifying their kind of style, their identity. They've kind of done a good job at really saying this is the type of team we are. These are our strengths. These are the things we do well. These are the things we don't do well. And playing to their strengths more, which is a thing that I think more teams need to do. If you can't play meta comps, which is fine, the way that the meta is now, it is pretty open. So you can really just play to your strengths, and you can usually find map wins and match wins if you do that. Obviously, every game someone has to lose, and some teams just don't end up being nearly as good as others. But I have been very impressed by the Valiant so far, and I think that this Valiant team is in a much better position than I think a lot of people thought they were. I think they're arguably better than the Spitfire. They're certainly better than the Eternal, and they're arguably right now more inspiring than the Defiant. So I don't want to write off this Valiant team at all. I think they have a lot of potential going forward, and I think they're one of those teams that I'm very intrigued to watch going forward, because I think more often than not they've done a lot of good for the team, and I think that they are a roster that I have pretty high hopes for in terms of being able to maybe have like a Vancouver Titans style run from last year where they have a pretty rough opening to the season, but you see the things that are working for the team, you see them start to develop, and maybe there's a certain meta that they hit and they're able to kind of have a good second half run that is somewhat promising. I don't think they're a team that's going to be competing for a title, but I think that there is at least potential here, and I think this roster is some players that could be the building blocks for teams going forward. Let's move on over to the APAC region, where there was a pretty interesting weekend. I mentioned before that the Seoul Infernal were the team that kind of did a lot of stuff. But let's start by talking about the Dallas Fuel, the defending champions of the 2022 Overwatch League season. They had a very rough start to the year, of course, losing their first 3 matches. 3-0 loss to the Charge, 3-1 loss to the Spark, 3-0 loss to the Infernal. But this weekend, they finally got their wins. They finally found some victories in the region, and it was against the Shanghai Dragons and the Seoul Dynasty. They're the 2 lowest rated teams in the region. Most of us feel like they are pretty much the weakest teams here in the APAC region. But the Fuel, 3-0 win over Shanghai, 3-1 win over the Seoul Dynasty. I think they are finally starting to feel more comfortable. They finally look like they're kind of understanding what they are. I don't think they're a perfect team by any means. I still don't think they look like one of the favorites to get out of this region. But I think when you look at what they've done, I think this is one of those teams that in the knockouts will be very fun to watch because they got themselves in the top 4, which means they don't have to play on the first weekend or the very first day of games next weekend. They get a little bit of time to kind of look and see where things are. They only have to play 1 match next week, so I think that helps them a lot. That kind of lets them kind of settle down a bit, figure out their style, figure out what they want to be, what they want to do. I think that helps a ton kind of as you move forward. And then if you look and you see where they go as a team, right? It'll be interesting to kind of see their trajectory, right? So they'll play the winner of the Shanghai Dragons and Sinprisa Gaming next weekend, next Sunday. That's a very, very winnable game for the Dallas Fuel. Those are 2 teams that they should be better than. And so I think you have to look at this Dallas Fuel team and say, okay, they are back. They're not at their peak. They're certainly not right now at the same level as the Seoul Infernal or the Hangzhou Spark or the Guangzhou Charge, but they look very good at what they're good at. They're figuring out what they can run and what they can succeed on. Maybe they make changes, maybe they add more players in time, but I like what the Fuel have done. I think they look pretty solid, and I think that they will be fine. Like I said, I don't think they're a top 3 team in the region right now. In a 6-team region, that is pretty rough. But they certainly have a chance to get out of these knockouts and make a splash and surprise everyone and make it in to the Mid-Season Madness. It's not off the table. Absolutely is not off the table. But we finally are starting to see them click. We're starting to see them kind of do their thing. And I think it'll be good to see them kind of get that off. Once you've gotten that first win, it changes a lot of how you play, right? Getting the first win is arguably the hardest win to get because it can be very draining and very hard on your mental if you are just losing game after game after game after game, right? Especially when you have rookies like this support line with Bliss being a rookie, and then you have MCD who's coming into this team for the first time this year. It can be very hard for those 2 players in particular to come into a team that won last year and you're all of a sudden not winning anything. Is it our fault? Are we the reason why? Is this our problem? But you win a game and that kind of goes away. At least a little bit. And so I think that's what they needed to have. So this is a good weekend for them. I'm excited to see them in the knockouts. I think that they really are stepping up where they need to be. And so good for the Dallas Fuel finally getting that first win of the season. Final headline for the week. Let's talk about the Seoul Infernal. This was a huge weekend for them. They had matches against both the Guangzhou Charge and the Hangzhou Spark, the 2 top-rated teams in this region going into the weekend. And the Infernal were victorious against both of them. 3-2 win over the Guangzhou Charge, 3-0 win over the Hangzhou Spark. The Seoul Infernal putting themselves in a position to be one of the best teams in that eastern region right now. Currently number 2 seed based on differential, but record-wise, same record as the Guangzhou Charge. Mag had a very good game against the Charge. His Wrecking Ball looked very, very good. This meta, I think, does work very well for the Infernal. They can play a lot of Winston, which is very good, and that's one of their strengths. We also saw them play some like Rhine, and obviously some Ball. They also have had very good performances out of Skewed, MN3, Zest, and Fixa, right? This team all over the place has looked very, very good. So I do think the Seoul Infernal are arguably, and I think it's pretty, there's some arguments to be made, but I think right now they look like the best team in this Eastern region. They would have to play, I believe, the winner of the O2 Blast versus Panthera game, if I remember correctly, which is kind of dangerous, right? Like O2 Blast is the best team in Korean contenders, so you kind of think, well, you know, that could be tough, but right now I would pick the Infernal in that game. I think that the Infernal look very good. I don't think they necessarily have the same level of depth, but like we saw Mag play some Diva against the Hangzhou Spark as well, so I do think right now the Seoul Infernal look very strong, better than even I expected them to look right now. I thought they were not going to be. I thought they were going to be a bottom 2 team in this region, and they're arguably the best. So very good weekend from them. They are the one who the 2 of my 3 incorrect picks were because of the Seoul Infernal. And that's just what you get from a team that just looks very, very good right now. So huge weekend for them. Huge kind of going into the spring knockouts now, looking to kind of lock up that #1 seed from the APAC region. That will be a lot of fun to see. Now let's take a look at the standings as we close out this 3rd week of action. Pretty good amount of movement if you take a look. You can see it on your screen. Rain, like I said before, still sitting at the top. Mayhem and Outlaws now 2nd and 3rd. Outlaws moving down after their loss to the Rain. Mayhem had moved down last week after their loss to the Gladiators, but they have moved back up to a pretty high point here. Uprising, good weekend for them, despite not playing, moves them up. The big one still is the Gladiators, still pretty low because of their 2-2 record. Shock with a little bit of movement in potentially a positive direction, though. 2-2 -4, pretty disappointing, except the fact that New York, with 2 more losses, has the same differential, which is pretty embarrassing there. Defiant, almost at the bottom of the standings, really is quite a shocker. And then in the East, Charge #1 by 1 map over the Infernal. Spark dropping to 3rd. Fuel jumping to 4th, and then Dragons and Dynasty rounding out that standings. So all in all, a pretty decent week from this past weekend. It'll be very fun to see going into next week with the APAC teams, the Korean teams from contenders, and I guess the one Chinese team. I should be more fair to that. That is technically not all Chinese Korean teams. Contender teams coming in. Eastern region be really, really fun, so that'll be awesome to see. But that's going to be all from me for today. If you enjoyed this video, want more like it in the future, consider liking and subscribing for more content like this in the future. Remember, you can find in the description a link or the code for my Pick'em bracket group if you want to join it. Find that in the description. That's going to be all from me for today. If you enjoyed, like I said, consider liking and subscribing. Comment down below your thoughts on what happened this past weekend. Hope you're all staying safe and staying healthy. And until next time, bye-bye.